Hello everyone, and welcome to my fourth tutorial on how to create full-stack web applications. In this tutorial, I'm going to be implementing part of our blog entry controller class, and the rest of the implementation of our blog entry controller class will be in the source code and I link in the description. So my reason for doing this is to decrease the fluff in the tutorial so I can focus on the key features I want to illustrate to you guys. So I'm going to be implementing the get method of our blog entry controller class using TDD, and I'm also going to be showing you guys how to use Spring Hatos, which is a library to provide the Hatos constraint to your RESTful resources, so that basically you can inject links into your RESTful resources and link to other associated resources, and that's what Spring Hatos provides. And so I'll be covering Hatos resource support class, and also the Hatos resource assembler support class, and for constructing our RESTful resources. And I'm also going to be covering path variables for binding Java parameters to variables in the request URL. And I'm also going to be changing our directory structure around to support a better development process. So to start off, I'm going to go to Spring Hatos project page. You can search Spring Hatos, and then it will be the first link here. And you're going to want to get this particular dependency on the page and paste that into your POM file in your main section. So that adds Spring Hatos support to your library. Now, an example of, I'm going to just go to the reference for Spring Hatos and show you guys what a JSON object looks like that supports the Hatos constraint. So this is an example of a JSON object supporting the Hatos constraint, and you can see it has a array of named links, and the name is stored in the rel attribute and the location in the href attribute, and this particular one has a link to has a link called self pointing to this particular URL. Now all your resources, you'll want to have a self link so that if you put them in a list, your resources in a list, for example, you can navigate to a URL to get more details about the resource. And you'll also want to have links to other related resources. So this helps in a couple ways. For one thing, when a client programs against an API that's using Hatos, it will be much easier for the client to navigate the API. And secondly, if a client uses Hatos, it decouples the client from having any underlying knowledge of the URL naming scheme provided by the server. So in other words, the server can change the location of a resource without breaking the clients. So it allows more or less the server and the client to evolve independently. And the Hatos principle is basically that a client should be able to interact with the resources completely through hypermedia. And so the Spring Hatos library helps us in adding that constraint to our RESTful resource by providing us with a way of building links that's maintainable, and also a way of converting to a variety of Hatos formats. So I'm going to be including the Spring Hatos library into our dependencies, and as I've done here, and I'm also going to have a change of package structure here. I'm going to be moving our blog entry controllers and our external representations of resources to their own package. So I'm going to be moving our blog entry controller class to a package called tutorial.rest.mbc. So all our blog entry controllers, all our controllers, and also external representations of objects, i.e. objects that we're going to convert using Jackson, will be placed in the tutorial.rest package, and all our JPA entities we're going to convert blog entry to an internal JPA entity, which basically means a persistent object. An object will be able to persist to the database and also store relational information. All our JPA entities are going to go into a package called tutorial.core.entities. So basically all JPA entities and services related to JPA entities will go in the tutorial.entities, the tutorial.core package, and all external resources and controllers will go in the tutorial.rest package. So I'm going to move our blog entry controller to the tutorial.rest package.mvc, and I'm going to have IntelliJ move this class to that package. And I'm going to go to our blog entry controller, and our blog entry entity, and I'm going to move this class to the core package, which is where we're going to store our JPA entities. And so basically we're not going to be using blog entries here to convert back and forth between JSON. Instead, we're going to use a different class called a blog entry resource class, which will be our external representation of our internal blog entry entity. So I'm going to erase this method, and I'm going to create that class. I'm going to place it in the REST package. So I'm going to place it in the tutorial.rest.resource package, and I'm going to call it blog entry resource. And I'm going to have it extend the resource support class of Hatos. And we'll also want to add the fields that we want to display publicly using when it's converted to via Jackson, and also the kinds of data we want to receive back from a client when they send a blog entry resource. So you're going to want to copy over the title field from our blog entry entity and place that into our blog entry resource. Now I'm also going to add an ID attribute to our blog entry here, and this is for the purpose of this is to help when we actually start implementing JPA. But right now this is so that we have uniquely identifiable blog entries, and we can use the ID to help us build the self URLs when we're using Hatos. So I'm going to generate a getter and setter here, and now I'm going to go to our blog entry controller, and now our blog entry controller is going to be using a service for getting the blog entries. We're just going to implement the method get in this tutorial, and the rest of the methods will be in the source code and the link in the description. So I'm just going to implement the method get, and so we're going to have a service that provides a way of getting blog entries, and we'll create a mock for that service, a mock object for that service. So I'm going to that's going to be a service dealing with JPA entities, so I'm going to be placing that in the core package. So I'm going to call this blog entry service, and it's going to be an interface. So I'm going to set the kind of to interface, and I'm going to place it in the tutorial.core.services package. And I'm going to create a method here for getting a blog entry. So that will be important for when we create a mock object. But we also need to add this as an instance variable here in our controller. So I'm going to create a blog entry service here, and I'm going to create a public constructor here with the service passed in, and we'll use Makito to inject this service. And later on, we'll use Spring to auto-wire a real service during production. And now that we have a constructor set up to wire our service, I'm going to go to our blog entry controller test and create the mock object so that Spring can inject it. And you'll want to fix your blog entry controller import. So I'm going to hit Alt and Enter to fix that. And I'm going to specify a mock here, and this is going to be our mock service. So I'm going to write blog entry service service. So now Makito should instantiate a blog entry service mock object and inject that into our controller during testing. Now, before I continue, we also need a way to convert between our blog entry resources and our blog entries. So to do that, I'm going to be using the resource assembler support class of Hatos. Now that will allow us to reuse the converting code across different parts of our application. So I'm going to create the package class here in a subpackage of resources called ASM, and I'm going to place in there a class called blog entry resource ASM. So this will be the class we'll use to assemble our blog entry resources. So I'm going to have it extend blog resource assembler support class. Now the first parameter is what you're converting from. So we're converting from blog entry entities, and we're converting to our external representation, which is blog entry resource. And you'll want to create a public constructor here. And call the super method, the first element being the controller class with the associated resource, and the next one being the resource type. And finally, I'm going to implement a method here for actually converting the object. And we're going to create a new blog entry resource here. And we're going to set the title to the blog entry's title. And we're going to return that object. So now we have our converter set up. Now I can actually start working on creating a test for implementing the get function. So I'm going to go to our blog entry controller test here. I'm going to make a new test called, I'm going to change the name of this test to get existing blog entry. So we're going to test what happened. We're going to create a test to say what happens, what should happen when we get a blog entry that the service can find. So I'm going to specify the blog entry that our service is going to find. And I'm going to set its title to test title. And I'm going to set the ID to 1. And I'm going to have make the service return that blog entry when requested using the Makito when annotation. A static method. And I'm going to specify the service here. And when we find the entry with 1L, we want it to then return the entry we just made. And finally, we want to actually send a request to our controller. So I'm going to specify mock MVC.perform a get request to the URL blog entries /1. And I'm going to specify and expect. We're going to expect that returns JSON, and the title is going to contain the entry's test title. And I'm also going to expect that the JSON path contains the self link. So I'm going to grab all the href elements from all the links, and I'm going to check if that collection has an item that ends with blog entries /1, which will most likely be the self rel if it does have a self rel. So that should be a good test. And I'm going to also expect that the status is okay. Okay, so that should complete our test now. So if I run our test, it should fill. And let's see what happens. Okay, we have a failing test and says JSON cannot be null or empty. So now we're going to go to our blog entry controller class and implement this method. So I'm going to use request mapping. I'm going to specify a value of rest/blog entries. And now I'm going to use a path variable, which will allow us to bind a variable in our URL to a Java variable in the parameter. I'm going to specify blog entry ID here. And I'm going to specify a method of request method.get. So public response entity blog entry resource get blog entry, And now this is how you bind the variable to a variable in the parameter. You use the path variable annotation, and you specify the same name as the variable in the URL. So this will Spring will see this annotation and know it needs to bind this variable to the variable in the URL. So that will bind the variable. And now I'm going to get the blog entry from our service. And I'm going to use our blog entry resource assembler to convert that object. Now, you can turn this into a Spring Bean later on. We might make a Spring Bean out of this. But for now, I'm just going to instantiate it inside the function. And I'm going to convert it, the entry to the blog entry resource. And you can see that the blog entry resource assembler also has a function for converting an array of resources. So basically allows us to convert an array of resources and can prove to be pretty helpful in certain spots. And I'm also going to return the response entity now with the resource and the HTTP status of OK. So now if I run this, I don't think we haven't implemented the self link yet, so it should fail and say it needs a self link. It says it needs a self link here. So I'm going to go to our blog entry resource assembler, and I'm going to use Hatos's link builder to build our link. So you want to import static controller link builder from Hatos, and this will provide some methods for building links to our resource. So I'm going to specify a link here. I'm going to import the Hatos link here, and I'm going to use the Hatos link to method. Link to method on. So I'm going to specify a method on blog entry controller.class, and I'm going to use your dummy invocation. So this is like a way of getting executing a method, but not without really executing it. Just using it to grab the use the request mapping to build a link. So this isn't actually executing get blog entry, but just using the request mapping to build a link. So I'm going to specify the ID of the blog entry, and then I'm going to specify with self-rel. Now that should create a link linking to self. So I'm going to now add it to our resource with self-rel. Now if I run this, it should work. Let's see. Okay, so it passes. So our get method should be working, and I'm just going to print it out so you guys can see. I'm going to specify .undo and print. Okay, so you can see we have a get method here to this particular URL, and we're receiving this in response. So we're generating the links field of Hatos, and it has a self-rel with a link to the resource. So that's working correctly. And so looks like our get method is working for an existing blog entry, but now I'm going to really quickly make a method for testing what happens when the entry does not exist. So I'm going to create a method called get non-existing blog entry, and I'm just going to erase this here and set this to null. So I just copied over our first function, and now I'm just modifying it to work with for an entry that doesn't exist. So I'm going to erase all this except this, and I'm going to have is not found. So we want it to return a status of is not found if our service returns null. So I'm going to run this, and it should not pass. Alright, so we have a failing test, and it says a null pointer exception. I'm going to go to our blog entry controller class, and I'll implement this functionality. So if entry is not equal to null, we're going to do what we've already done, but otherwise we're going to return a new response entity with the HTTP status of is not found. So now this should make the test pass. Okay, you can see it passes. So our get function is working, and we have Hatos support now in our program, and also demonstrating how to use TDD to create your controller. So yeah, I think this tutorial is I think we've explained what we need to in this tutorial. I'm going to explain path variables. Actually, there's one more thing I want to show you guys. You can actually have a class level request mapping, so that will the final request mapping on the method level will be the concatenation of the class level and the method level. So you can actually specify at the class level request mapping and specify /blog entries, /blog entries, and then you don't need this part in your method level request mapping. Now, I think that this might actually break Hatos the way it currently is, but let me just run it to see. Okay, alright, no, it still works, okay, but another way you can actually link to Hatos is you can, link to your method here is you can, there's actually another way to do that with Hatos. If you have a class level request mapping, like up here, you can actually build a link to the resource using that. So I can just specify a link to the class, and then I can specify dot slash with the ID of the blog entry, and with self. So that's another way you can generate the link, and we'll use the class level request mapping to generate the link there. So you can see that works. So yeah, there's different ways to build links, and you can add links with different rails too. Yeah, so definitely a very useful API for adding Hatos support to your application. And I'm going to be using this in later tutorials when we're working with AngularJS. And in fact, there's an AngularJS library out there for use with the Spring Hatos library. So we'll be building a very modern RESTful web service, and I'm looking forward to making the later tutorials. Anyways, if you guys found this video helpful, subscribe to my channel, and thank you for watching.